Imagine for a second that you've just made a massive mistake at work.
Yeah, that is never a fun feeling.
No, it's not. And I'm not talking about, a typo in an email. I'm talking about a catastrophic system-crashing blunder. For 99% of us, the immediate physiological reaction is that cold pit in your stomach. Panic, shame.
Right.
The instinct to hide it, bury it, or just patch it up with duct tape before anyone even notices.
Because that is the default human operating system, right? It's survival mode.
Yeah.
You want to protect your status. You want to protect your job.
Exactly. But today, I want you to imagine a specific type of person who looks at that exact same smoking crater of a mistake, and they don't feel shame. They feel excitement.
Excitement, which sounds completely counterintuitive.
Right. But to them, that error isn't a failure at all. It's a goldmine. It's the exact piece of data they needed to rewrite the entire rulebook.
It's a completely different mental architecture. For this personality type, it's not about regret. It's about recalibration.
And that is exactly the profile we are breaking down today. We're doing a deep dive into the WSAN, which is also known as the Active Pattern Reformer. And this comes from the Max Energy ME80 personality assessment.
Yes, and this is honestly one of the most fascinating profiles in the entire ME80 system, because they essentially function like a human software patch.
A human software patch. I love that.
Yeah, if you view your organization or your family or even just your own daily habits as a code base, the WSAN is the update that runs automatically when things start crashing. They are the ultimate optimizers.
So our mission today is to understand the actual mechanics of what the report calls systemic upgrade. We're going to look at how this personality thinks, how they lead, and frankly, why they might be the most exhausting but absolutely necessary person to work for.
Necessary but exhausting is probably the most accurate description I've heard for them.
Before we really get into the weeds here, just a quick disclaimer. We are analyzing the ME80 report specifically, but the concepts we're going to talk about today, how to handle failure, how to iterate on systems, these are universal. You don't need to actually be a WSAN to learn from one.
Absolutely. This whole deep dive is basically a masterclass in crisis management for anyone listening.
So let's start with the assessment system itself. For the listener who might be brand new to the max energy concept, give us the 30-second elevator pitch. How is ME80 different from, say, Myers-Briggs or the Enneagram?
The core difference is right there in the name, max energy. Most tests out there, they classify personality based on social traits, like are you loud or quiet, are you friendly or reserved?
Yeah, behavioral stuff.
Exactly. ME80 doesn't do that. It maps the internal flow of your energy. It looks at the mechanics of your mental wiring.
So it's less about who you are at a party and more about how your engine actually runs.
Spot on. It maps 4 specific stages. First, how do you perceive value? Second, how do you process emotion? Third, how do you make a decision based on that? And finally, how does all of that convert into outward action? It's looking under the hood at the engine, not just inspecting the paint job.
And today's engine is the WSAN. Let's look at the hero identity that's defined in the report. It says, and I'm quoting here, mends broken patterns and turns repentance into a driving force for systemic upgrade.
It's a dense sentence, but it is very, very precise.
It is dense, but I have to stop you on one specific word in there, repentance. That feels incredibly heavy. I mean, it sounds almost biblical. Why is a professional personality report talking about repentance?
It does sound dramatic at first glance, but you really have to strip away the religious context. In the ME80 framework, repentance is entirely structural.
Okay, what does that mean?
It's the ability to look at a deviation, a mistake, and fully objectively acknowledge it without any ego getting in the way. It's the capacity to stand up and say, we were going north, but the data proves we should actually be going northeast.
So it's not, oh, I'm so sorry, I'm a terrible person. It's more like, I'm sorry, the calculation was incorrect.
Precisely. For the WSAN, an error isn't a stain on their character. They don't take it personally. It is simply a usable data entry point.
Usable data entry point. That is such a clinical way to view a screw-up.
But incredibly effective. Think about it. Most leaders are terrified that if they admit a mistake, they're going to lose their authority. The active pattern reformer completely flips that script. They believe that if a process stalls out, the only way to fix it is to acknowledge the error loud and clear and immediately lead a direction realignment.
It's like a software engineer who's actually happy they found a bug in the code, because now they finally have permission to release version 2.0.
That is the perfect analogy. They aren't trying to just patch the bug so things go back to the status quo. They use that bug as justification to upgrade the entire system to something superior. They operate with this philosophy of control through upgrade.
If I can improve it, I can control it. That sounds great in theory, but I really want to understand the why behind this. What is happening under the hood to make someone think this way? The report talks a lot about an energy matrix.
Right. The energy matrix is essentially the blueprint of their mind. For the WSAN, the report describes their energy as having extreme action propulsion power as surface, which is supported by deep strategic logic as foundation.
So they move really fast, but it's not just running around with their hair on fire. It's not chaotic.
It's calculated velocity. The ME80 system breaks this matrix down into 4 specific layers: IP, IQ, EQ, and manifestation. And for the WSAN, this specific combination is what makes them so unique. We should probably go through them one by one to really get it.
Let's do it. Let's peel back these layers. So layer 1 is IP, the inner value layer. This is the root of the system, what actually drives them.
Their IP is driven by risk perception activation.
Risk perception. That sounds a lot like anxiety. Are they just constantly worried about things going wrong?
It's not anxiety, though I can see why you'd think that. It's more like a highly tuned radar system. Anxiety is a vague, paralyzing fear of the unknown. Risk perception is a very specific detection of structural imbalances.
Okay, so it's targeted.
Very targeted. They value stability and correctness so highly that their brain is constantly scanning the environment for what could potentially break.
Yeah.
Imagine walking into a room and immediately, without even trying, noticing the one painting that is hanging slightly crooked.
Yeah.
That is how their brain works, but with business processes and systems.
So they really are the canary in the coal mine.
A canary that brings its own fire extinguisher.
I like that.
Because that leads us right into the second layer, IQ, the emotional activation layer. This is how they verify their world.
Now, usually when we hear emotional activation, it implies feelings. Sadness, joy, anger, that sort of thing.
Not here. For the WSAN, their emotion is triggered by verification. They rely heavily on experience and verification judgment.
Unpack that for me. Does that mean they just don't have feelings?
No, of course they have feelings. It means their sense of security, their emotional baseline, comes from empirical data. When they're assessing a crisis, they aren't asking themselves, how do I feel about this? Or what does my gut tell me to do? They are asking, does this match the data patterns I've seen in the past?
So if the current data matches their past experience, they feel calm. But if it doesn't match, they feel stressed.
Exactly. They are constantly cross-referencing the current situation against a massive mental database of previous failures and successes. This is what makes them so incredibly reliable in a crisis. They aren't panicking. They're just querying their database.
Which flows directly into the third layer, the EQ layer, or decision calculation. And reading the report, this seems to be where the WSAN really confuses people.
This is definitely the most misunderstood part of their personality. Usually, EQ stands for emotional intelligence, empathy, reading the room, making people feel heard and validated. But for the active pattern reformer, this layer is defined as emotional detachment and understanding.
Detachment. That sounds, I don't know, it sounds a bit cold, bordering on robotic even.
It can absolutely seem that way to other types, especially to personalities who highly value social harmony. But think about the functional utility of it. If you are a surgeon and your patient is crashing on the operating table, you cannot afford to be sentimental.
Right.
You can't be weeping over the specific surgical tools or worrying if the attending nurse likes you. You need to detach from the emotion and cut.
So this emotional detachment isn't a flaw, it's actually a tool.
It is their absolute superpower. It allows them to cut their losses instantly. While other leaders are falling hard for the sunk cost fallacy, thinking, oh, we spent $2 million on this project, we have to keep going because we love the team. The WSAN is just looking at the math.
And saying, it's broken, kill it next.
Exactly. It allows for that rapid direction realignment we talked about earlier. They simply do not let their ego get attached to the old plan.
Wow. And finally, that brings us to layer 4, the manifestation layer.
This is the output. Impact and action. This is not a theoretical personality type. They don't just sit around, write a brilliant white paper about the problem, and file it away in a drawer. Their energy has to be released outward to physically change their environment.
So let's just recap this engine really quickly. They sniff out the risk, which is the IP layer. They verify it against past data patterns, the IQ layer. They emotionally detach to make the hard, necessary choice, which is EQ. And then they hit the big red button to make the change actually happen in the real world, the manifestation layer.
That is the mechanism in a nutshell. It is a straight, unfiltered line from detection directly to correction.
And that specific combination of traits gives them a deep characteristic that the report calls error reception and reconstruction.
Which brings us right back to that concept of repentance.
Right, because most people, they claim they're good at taking criticism, but in reality they get defensive or they argue the semantics of it. How is the WSAN different in practice?
The report describes them as having surgical, scalpel-like sensitivity toward structural anomalies. But the key behavioral difference here is transparency. When they find an error, even if it is entirely their own fault, they transparently explain the correction logic to everyone.
That is so rare to see. Usually corporate leadership is all about the spin. It wasn't a mistake, it was a strategic pivot.
Right, the classic spin. But for the WSAN, the report notes that admitting error actually removes upgrade obstacles. To them, the excuse itself is the obstacle. If I pretend the mistake didn't happen, I can't fix the underlying system. If I admit it plainly, I can get straight to work.
Think about the kind of culture that creates on a team. If the leader stands up in a meeting and says, "Hey everyone, I calculated this completely wrong. Here is exactly why it failed, and here is the new plan." That creates immense psychological safety.
It really does. It restores trust during moments of chaos. The team clearly sees that the leader isn't busy protecting their own reputation. They are fiercely protecting the mission. It acts as a stabilizing force, even though it involves constant, rapid change.
However, and there is always a however in these deep dives, we have to talk about the shadow side. Every single superpower has a blind spot. What is the kryptonite for the active pattern reformer?
The report identifies their shadow blind spot as over-rapid version changes.
Oh man, I think I've worked for this exact person. The idea a minute boss.
Close. But it's not just throwing out ideas, it's actually implemented changes. The core issue is beautifully summarized in the report with the phrase, "pace leads digestion."
Pace leads digestion. What does that look like on a Tuesday afternoon at the office?
It means they are feeding the team new information and new protocols way faster than the team can actually digest them. Because the WSAN processes data so incredibly fast, and because they have that emotional detachment, they will often launch version 3.0 before the rest of the team has even figured out how to log into version 2.0.
Right, they are 3 or 4 moves ahead on the chessboard, but the rest of us are still trying to figure out how the knight moves.
Exactly. And this creates what the report calls a perception gap. The WSAN genuinely thinks they're being agile, honest, and proactive. But the team interprets this constant shifting as an unstable stance, or even worse, as insufficient capability.
They start whispering at the water cooler, does this guy even know what he's doing? He's changed the marketing plan 3 times this week.
It creates massive exhaustion. The report specifically mentions a struggle in environments that lack retrospective DNA. If an organization doesn't already have a built-in culture of looking back and learning quickly, if they're historically slow to adapt, the WSAN speed just feels like massive adaptation pressure. It crushes people.
So purely from a social dynamics perspective, how does this actually play out? If you're sitting in a conference room with a WSAN, what is the vibe?
The social persona is described very clearly as just the facts.
Very Joe Friday. Just the facts, ma'am.
Very much so. They appear extremely pragmatic. In meetings, their eyes are entirely on the process and the structure. They aren't there to chit-chat about your weekend or build interpersonal rapport through small talk. They're there to fix the workflow and get out.
I imagine some people really respect that efficiency, but others might find it lacking in warmth.
It's a double-edged sword. People absolutely admire their responsibility and their decisiveness. When the building is literally on fire, you want a WSN in charge. But the report also notes that others quickly tire of the constant high-frequency synchronization that's required to work with them. It takes a ton of caloric energy to stay aligned with someone who is constantly refining the alignment.
It's like trying to run alongside a moving train that just keeps spontaneously switching tracks. You just get tired.
That's a great image. And the real tragedy here is what the report calls the unseen intent. The expert notes emphasize that the WSAN is the indispensable engine acting with behind-the-scenes good intentions. They aren't actually trying to be cold or demanding. They genuinely believe that fixing the system is the highest form of taking care of the people in it.
That is such a key distinction to make. They show love by fixing your operational problems, not by holding your hand.
Exactly. But they often need a buffer. Number 2, who can translate that systemic structural care into actual human reassurance for the rest of the team.
So if you are a listener right now thinking, wow, this sounds exactly like me, or maybe you're thinking, I desperately need to hire someone like this to save my company, Where do they actually fit best? What is the killer app for this personality type in the business world?
Their core business advantage is defined as mechanism reconstruction power. They are natural-born system optimization specialists.
So you definitely don't want to put them in a role where everything is already running perfectly and you just need someone to maintain the status quo.
No, absolutely not. That would drive them crazy. They would probably break things just so they could fix them because they cannot stand operational idleness. You need to put them in environments where things are broken, overly complex, or completely stalled out.
What specific fields does the report recommend?
It lists a few highly compatible areas. First is organizational transformation. Think BPR, business process reengineering. Consulting.
But consultants who walk into a bloated corporation tear the whole thing down and build it back up leaner.
Exactly. They look at a messy, chaotic flowchart and immediately see the simplified path. Another huge area for them is product iteration. Agile development. The whole tech philosophy of fail fast, fix fast is basically the WSAN personality type turned into a corporate management methodology.
That makes total sense, and I assume crisis management has to be high on that list too.
It is. Crisis repair and project rescue. If you have a massive initiative that is bleeding money and is 2 years behind schedule, you send in an active pattern reformer. They have the emotional detachment required to kill the bad parts without feeling guilty, and the strategic logic to rebuild the good parts.
It sounds like they're also perfectly suited for strategy execution.
Specifically, dynamic strategy adjustment. In a market that shifts every single day, like the tech sector or crypto, you need a strategist who refuses to fall in love with a rigid 5-year plan. You need someone who treats the strategy as a living, breathing document that has to be updated constantly based on new data.
This has been such a massive eye-opener. I think we so often view consistency as the ultimate leadership trait. We always say we want the steady hand at the wheel, but understanding the WSAN really teaches us that sometimes consistency is just disguised stubbornness.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
Sometimes the absolute best leadership is the ability to stand up and say, I was wrong, here is the new data, let's pivot immediately.
That is the core lesson. If we connect this back to the bigger picture, the ultimate value of the active pattern reformer isn't just that they swoop in and fix one specific error, it's that they teach the entire system how to continuously upgrade itself. They model a culture where mistakes aren't fatal, they are educational.
And that actually brings us to the closing thought from the report, which I think is just beautiful in its own kind of mechanical way. It really sums up the entire experience of being a WSAN. It says, when order smooths, teams stabilize, and organizations clearly progress, regret has genuinely transformed into true propulsion power.
Regret transformed into propulsion power. That is the ultimate takeaway right there. Don't wallow in the mistake. Don't hide from it. Use the raw energy of that mistake to push the rocket forward.
I love that so much. Now, for everyone listening, this entire deep dive was based on the Max Energy ME80 Personality Assessment Report. If you found this analysis of the WSAN personality useful, there is a whole world of other fascinating profiles in that system.
Yes, and if you want to explore this system deeper, or maybe even find out what your own energy profile is, you can visit their official website at www.maxenergylife.com.
You can also search for Max Energy Egg or MedEnergy Mokihiri on Facebook to find their community and a ton of other resources.
It's definitely worth checking out if you're interested in the actual nuts and bolts of how we operate as humans.
So here is my final thought and a bit of a challenge to you, the listener, for this week. Think about the systems in your own life, your work routines, your habits, your relationships. What if the biggest mistake you are making right now isn't the error itself, but your refusal to let that error become your next upgrade?
Turn that glitch into a feature.
Exactly. Are you duct taping your mistakes, or are you using them as the source code for your personal version 2.0? Something to think about. Thanks for diving in with us today. We'll catch you on the next one.